Hello, hello. It has been a while. Luke was just saying he was getting pumped up to chat with you all again on Filled to Flourish. It has been some time. We have been busy.
Yeah,
Why have we been so busy? I don't quite know. Holidays, the holidays.
that's one of the reasons. Yeah,
Yeah, we have two
we
birthdays
got.
in January.
hmm
Paul was busy. We got a puppy.
Yeah, yeah. You haven't been in the office
Yeah,
in a
I've been
while.
on postpartum leave with the puppy.
Oh, also the kids were on break, so you couldn't come to the office.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, it's been a while.
it has been.
We're gonna try to get back into the podcasting rhythm. We always get just encouraging feedback and enjoy the depth we can get into with episodes, whereas like our goofy reels and our short little, content on social media is just limited. So
Yeah,
podcasting is great to get into more depth.
that's right. It is.
You have
So
a
what are you
beard.
gonna?
That's
I
new.
That's new. Yeah, it's
Very
getting cold here in Thailand. Trying to keep my face warm.
It's the lumberjack. Yeah, I love it. It's awesome. We were on a walk the other night and we were talking about essentially feminism. Don't run, don't be scared. Please don't turn us off. If that word scares you, we were just having a really good conversation about it. And we were like, we should bring this to the pod.
Yeah,
Yeah. So this isn't very scripted at all. We really want to flesh it out like together, but live. So
yeah.
we'll
No
let that go.
guest today. Just us. But it was a good conversation on the walk. A starting of a good conversation. So you wanted to continue. What are we talking about?
Kind of the jumping point of my theory. There's a lot of branches we can go off of it, but essentially I kind of went down a dark dive of documentaries in the past 3 months. I don't
That's the
know what
truth why we haven't done podcasting is
I've
Lauren's
just
been
been, yeah, binge watching all the documentaries.
locked herself in a room and watching documentaries.
Oh my gosh, it sounds so pathological. But for real, I have like all of them, so many. And I just I've been like this since I was young, just like so fascinated and intrigued by human behavior and why we do what we do. And that ultimately led to this field, which is all about why we do what we do. But something that I was noticing is this idea of how much men in history have caused so much unthinkable damage, oppression, assault,
Harm.
harm in the lives of women, also other men. But I was just thinking specifically about two women. And then I thought about kind of an opposing thought of, but they're so obsessed with women. Okay, so hear me out. I'm going to flesh it out. Of these polar poles of like, how could there be so much harm and subjugation? But also, if you look at like so many of the problems in the world, they're also driven by this like insatiable need to dominate and win over women. Speaking of heterosexual men. And I was noticing that polarization and trying to make sense of like, how could there be such seemingly like disconnected things in
Yeah.
all history? But then it was just like, you know what? Because if you hear like the word misogyny, I think part of the definition is like hatred,
hmm
thinking less of woman, but there's a hatred to it. And I was just thinking, like, I don't want to redefine misogyny because who the heck am I to do that? That's not the point. But my thought is, I almost wonder if it's not so much hatred of woman, but hatred of what men need from woman, the vulnerability, hatred of the vulnerability of needing woman. And this is like super deep crap here. Like we're just jumping in. But as I look at that, there is so much shame culturally for men to be vulnerable and have needs. And yet men cannot escape their need for connection to woman, whether it be platonically or romantically. And that need makes them, in a sense, vulnerable, or quote, weak. And
Yeah.
they've been conditioned to hate that. That's been seen as like the worst possible thing, to have a weakness and a vulnerability. And so instead of hating the culture that says that, they end up projecting their hate onto the object of their desire, essentially. That's it.
Wow.
That's my theory.
And that's the episode.
There.
As you were sharing about your theory and your observations, it clicked into another topic that we talk about, is high control religion, and how women are oppressed and subjugated in high control religious communities. And I was thinking about the vulnerability it takes to give a bid to a woman, and when you give a bid, there's opportunity to be rejected. So there's vulnerability. But if you can create an environment where it's not only helpful, but like it's godly to be a woman that submits, who sees the man as the authority, where there's obligation sex, that takes off the pressure from the man to give bids. And so it ensures safety of affirmation and protects the ego. And I don't just mean the ego as like the pride, but like the vulnerable parts of us. That it takes away that vulnerability and that fear aspect of free choice and vulnerability of, I want to be close to you. Do you want to be close to me? And it's like, well, she doesn't have a choice whether she wants to. It's my right, or it's a God's command. It keeps away the shame of rejection, the fear of not being good enough. Like from IFS, it protects our parts, protects us from our exiles, and it helps our parts stay safe, and the person stay safe. So that the exiles of rejection, isolation, alone, whatever it is, in different stories, from being exposed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say this part, these parts in men who aren't able to show vulnerability are probably really, really young, like began really early on, where they had a need, they expressed a desire or a want or a confusion. There was vulnerability in what they expressed, and they were met with external shame, which then, as we'll talk about in a minute, the shame cycle, that external shame internalizes, and they have that strong sense of internalized shame to any sense of vulnerability. So then they get to be the age of being with women, and hello, there's all kinds of vulnerability. So the way high control religion handles that is just makes a hierarchy and subjugates women and elevates men. And then men never have to face their vulnerability in that type of power dynamic. Like you said, they just can get their needs met, and it can be essentially forced.
As you were talking, I just thought about this. I don't know if this relates or connects, but you said it's a young part. And I'm thinking, like, as we know, there's implicit memories as well as explicit memories. So, like, if the mom was not able to attune because of dysregulation or whatever, I wonder if that's another way also that a manager will play out that anger towards the caregiver, the female caregiver, the mom, in a way that can get back at her. and get that need met and demand that need, where before that you demanded a need and you're helpless. I mean, but as an adult, there's power that they can use to get their needs met. And in a society that, in a culture that encourages men to use their power abusively, and can be I wonder if it could be a way of them working out even those attachment wounds with female partners.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it makes me think, like, initially they asked vulnerably.
Right. But they weren't going to do that again.
Right. It's like, oh, the crying baby, that's totally, sorry, what's the word? That's totally dependent on you to meet their needs. And yet you've been told, oh, do baby wise. We're guilty of that. Do this type of cry it out method, or you're just so dysregulated you can't attune well. Any of the multiple options that go into that. And so then you recognize, even implicitly, like Luke said, those memories that are before we remember them, right?
It was conscious before there's language and conscious awareness. Yeah.
Right. So then you develop the understanding, like you said, your managers do. I can't use vulnerability to get my needs met. Are you kidding me? I'm going to use force. I'm going to use manipulation. I'm going to use shame and fear to get other people to meet my needs. And those are
religion.
Burden parts. And religion is often, all across the board, all high control religions, is a great way to repackage that and make that look holy.
Oof. You were mentioning the shame cycle. I think this is another important part of this conversation as we continue to learn more and more about IFS, which is such a useful paradigm.
You want to show them the book on screen if they're watching? Do you have it here?
I do. It's called Internal Family Systems Therapy for Shame and Guilt by Martha Sweezy. And in there, she talks about the shame cycle, and it's been like really eye-opening and just like clarifying personally and professionally, just the understanding of this pattern. So basically, she explains it in 6 acts, so like a play. So like the first act is a child gets harmed by an adult or caregiver, and harmed by a message was given to them. And act 2 is you believed the message, you owned it. And so let's use the example.
It's like an inner critic.
Yeah. So yep, an inner critic. And then act 4 is a scout, and this part helps you predict and foresee, like see the future of opportunities where you're going to be seen as incompetent. Maybe Lauren asked me to make something, fix something. Inner critic's like, you're not going to do this right. And the scout's like, yeah, this is an opportunity where like this isn't going to work out for you. You need to like run. So you're kind of on guard, but maybe you do it. Fair enough. Lauren comes to me and is like, what's taking so long? Or that's not the right place, or I wanted you to like something maybe off. And it's this, and so there's act 5, the warrior comes out. The warrior wants to bring safety back to the inner system. The shamer is causing distress. The scout is panicking and seeing all these threats. So the warrior comes in and is like, hey, Luke, there's a lot going on in you. This isn't your fault. Lauren is being difficult. She's being picky. She's being needy. She's being critical. She's being perfectionistic. And so Lauren comes and says, hey, that's not what I wanted. Of course, it's not what you wanted. It's never what you wanted. And This is how you always respond. And the purpose of that is to bring safety within. So this would be like a firefighter, bring safety back into my system. So it has she calls it a pro-social desire to bring safety for connection, but by default, the approach is antisocial.
Yeah.
And it pushes people away.
The
And
warrior
so
is
then
the perfect name for it.
yeah. And then there's Act 6, which comes to like the feel-good part. And this is the part that you dissociate, you isolate, binge eat, binge watch video games, you escape.
Yeah, self-soothe in some way.
Yeah. And she talks about how usually when you come into therapy, you're dealing with Act 3, the shamer. And Act 1 and 2 sometimes are the last things that come up because we're not aware of them. We're not consciously, we don't know what they are. A lot of times they're exiles. But interesting how that shamer has such good intentions. So the other thing with the shamer is it wants you to get better, but sometimes it also shames the part that makes you vulnerable. So say, I'm not, what was the example? I'm not good
My
enough.
dad, yeah.
And so I'm not good enough. Another side of that is a pursuit of relationships to tell me that I'm good,
Hmm.
a desire for connection. So the shamer might keep that part. That's the exile. Like connection is an exile because that brings vulnerability. So you stay down there in the basement and this isn't good to be vulnerable. This isn't good to want connection. So we do that. So, and now let's turn over here and let's just make you better. And so when we come back to the conversation we're having today, like that vulnerability of asking for connection, giving bids, a lot of times that shamer's already been working on that part and saying, you don't need to be here. We're just going to work on being a better husband. And this is how you be a better husband. You keep your house in order. And the warrior comes in and, well, it was not my fault I was looking at porn. We haven't had sex in a week and a half.
Hmm.
Why are you talking to her? Well, I mean, you've been really cold to me. That warrior's coming out because of the shame of, I want connection, but I don't know how to ask for it. And I can blame somebody else for my actions and not have to actually fess up or accept the reality that I am making mistakes.
Yeah. So the warrior throws the shame, tries to eject the
Project.
shame out of the system and project it onto someone else or some other entity to
Right,
get the shame out so there can be more balance inside the system.
right.
So even the warrior's intention is good, even though its impact is very, very damaging. If you've been in relationship with someone who has very strong warriors, you know how painful it is to have the blame shifting, the gaslighting, manipulation
Oh,
come from those
yeah.
warriors.
That's like Darvo, gaslighting, those are all warriors. Um, and it's really health. Like that doesn't make them okay, but it is helpful to know that that's driven by shame. Um, and obviously the person has to accept that as well and work on it. But as
Right.
a as a practitioner, it's nice. It's easy. It's better to see those as shame so that we can work with them.
And it's really important to differentiate people that do abusive things sometimes or once in a while versus abusive people or abusers. Understanding the warrior that's behind them, it could be similar, but our response to that warrior totally differs depending on if the abuse is a pattern of abuse or if it's just, wow, this person's extremely triggered and they're really acting out of character and their warrior is out and strong. and is gaslighting me right now. This could be
Yeah.
children, this could be coworkers, partners, parents, friends, but that's not the pattern of the relationship.
Right.
When it becomes a pattern, then it potentially classifies them, likely classifies them as an abuser. And that also doesn't mean that they can't seek help and can't deal with those warriors that cause a lot of harm. But it's more of an entrenched pattern, and that's going to take a lot more work, and you're going to need a lot more boundaries to be in relationship with them. So just want to throw that out.
Yes.
And also,
important.
People come to therapy also showing like the act 6 of it, where they're coming for this addiction, or they're coming for this explosive anger, or they're coming for this shut down and won't get a job and can't work and can't get out of bed. There's this very extreme behavior that they're coming for. Like she says, you don't get to really the real reason, which is act 1 and 2, until farther into therapy.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Really quick before we wrap up, giving the quick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 again, not explaining it, but just giving like the names kind of.
Yeah. It's like act 1 is the wound, act 2 is the owning of that wound, act 3 is the shamer, act 4 is the scout, act 5 is the warrior, and act 6 is the feel good part.
Wow, that's super powerful. So we didn't totally wrap it all in, tie it all up perfectly, but I think that the shame cycle really comes into play with the theory that we were talking about on the walk the other day about why men historically have been so subjugating and oppressing of woman. They could do it culturally, so we're not denying, like, they have just had the privilege and the power and they've been able to do it, but just throwing this into the historical and cultural conversation of maybe men actually hate the vulnerability within themselves, and it gets projected out, like the warrior does, onto the object of their interest and desire and need, so that they don't have to feel those hard feelings.
Yep. I think there's something to it. I do.
We're gonna have to go deeper outside of this and really
maybe we'll bring it back when we
have
continue
more
to flesh it out.
Yeah, that'd be good. All righty, well, it's great being on the podcast again today with Luke, and all of you listeners. We're super thankful for your support. If this resonates, if our work is enjoyable, please share it with someone else who might benefit, and we'll see you next time on the Feel the Flourish podcast.